Hey everyone, it's me, Lisa, and I'm coming at you with another video. Today we are comparing Orca Monroe, the main character from the newly published novel by Abby Emmons, to Rapunzel from Tangled. So without any further ado, let's get into the video. If you're not familiar with what Tangled is, first, you've been living under a rock, and secondly, I'm here to catch you up. So, Tangled is this fairy tale story about this girl that, as she was born, displayed magical powers and was therefore kidnapped and trapped into a tower by the evil Mother Gothel, and she has been trapped for 18 years of her life until she decides it's time to leave the nest and see what she has seen from her window for all of her life, which is the lights that come up every year for her birthday. And because her mother doesn't agree, she just takes off and goes. And from there, the whole adventure starts. On the other hand, we have Abby Emmons' story, and this story is, in my opinion, very much inspired by Tangled. And I'm going to discuss today in what ways, and it's going to be a reflection on mainly technique and how things were achieved. So it's not a judgment upon the story that you can find for the other world in this video up here. We can see that for first, the premise is very similar in the two stories. Tangled is based on this girl that is trapped in a tower, and on the other hand we have Orca that is living on an island with her father for all of her life. She has lived there, and she has this opportunity to leave the island when this guy crashes with his plane on the island, and she finds him and is in the meantime in contact with his brother, and so she meets these two boys and they open the possibility for her to go visit the other world, which is the rest of the world that she has never seen. She's very traditional in a sense that we might think about it as how someone would have been maybe 50 years ago. So for example, she doesn't have TV, has never eaten a pizza, doesn't know about most things that have been developed, and she grows plants. She's very traditional in how she was brought up, and what she can do is very homemakey, because she can cook, she can do everything within her property, and props to her, that's really good. And the depiction of her patches of plants is really nice. So as we see, the premise was very similar, and we have the main character trapped and a questionable member of the family that keeps the main character away from pursuing her dreams, and in this case it's a female main character in both cases. And then we start to see the divergence in the stories, because we have the first divergence that comes in the way that they go about leaving the nest and approaching the other world, or the world in general. And in Rapunzel's case, she knows that there's no way her mother Gothel is going to agree to letting her go. So because one dude pops up in her tower at some point for a completely different reason and has no intention of touching her hair and has no idea who she is, she takes the bet, asks him to guide her in the world, and that's their bet. She will give him back the crown that he has stolen if he does this for her. I think that that was a really cool premise, because it gave space to a relationship that doesn't start on romance. And I think that that was really cool because especially at the beginning, he is very, very confident. He's quite attractive, and so he is like, oh yeah, you're gonna fall for me. And she's like, no heck, and smashes him with a pan, which is so iconic, and I found it so power move. That made the whole story start on a very fun premise, and that's what made it very, very cool. On the other hand, we have how Orca goes about leaving the island, and this is basically after she has rescued Adam. She takes care of him for around a week, and then when her father comes back, she asks him to go, he says no, and she goes because they go there with the intention of leaving, and he's like, okay, whatever, and he lets her go. That, I think that as an intention, was a cooler way of not letting down a parent, even though the way that he's controlling her in this instance is very questionable. He's a very untraditional father in a way that he does force her into remaining on the island for 18 years of her life, and I think that that's questionable. The way that they told him doesn't leave them off the hook, because that was a rushed decision that came from a deep desire, but it doesn't really make it better the fact that they tell him, because he's not agreeing anyway, and so they just leave. I didn't find that that plot point in The Other World was as effective, in my opinion, because it made no difference in this instance, because the guilt that both characters face when they leave is obvious that it's going to be there, because they are going to think that they let down the parent that is left behind, so obviously they're going to be very, very sad about their action. The contact with the new world, I think, is very, very different in the two stories, because when in Rapunzel's case we have an incredible excitement at everything that happens, I feel that that is very well shown by what happens. We have an initial interaction of Rapunzel she's in a pub, she's surrounded by criminals, by people that look at their worth, they're dirty, they smell, they are covered in bruises, it's horrible. And she ends up making everyone like her. She makes everyone be on her side, even though they just met her. And I think that that's the best display of power that we have from this girl. She's a very naive girl, and I really love that about Rapunzel and how she comes in contact with the world that she has never seen. On the other hand, we have Orca, and in that case with Orca, the story separates at this point, because we have Adam on one side that is the love interest, but because he's 10 years older than her, they don't really tell that to anyone. That makes it a sideway point that keeps coming up, because Jack is also interested in Orca, and he brings her around to show her the beautiful things about this other world. And I felt that by the way that she reacted to them, the way that she engaged with these new things, that didn't make them special. And I feel that it was a really underwhelming experience for me as a reader to come in contact with these things that should have a fresh perspective. They should have been narrated from the part of someone that has never seen anything before. It would be super cool to come in contact with all of those things. And she had the excitement previously to go see The Other World, but it's just like, oh yeah, the pizza is super awesome, or oh my god, this film is super nice, and that's all. We have her saying this, and we don't see her enjoying her experience, which I think took away a lot from the potential that the book could have had to have pictured the world that we live in and that we are so used to in a new and magical way, and that Rapunzel literally brings in her bag and takes away.
And here I just want to say that upon further reflection, I think that a reason why maybe I didn't feel as much when she was seeing all of those things is because maybe Orca wasn't as impressed, which can totally be something that she could have felt. And I feel for her because it's like she comes from a reality when everything is so wonderful because she can do everything. She is the queen of her life. And she goes into this new world where she's expecting to see all of those wonderful things. And apart from having the beautiful experience of the pizza and movie, she doesn't feel for that world as much excitement as she thought she would have. And that is such a valid point because maybe you come from a reality that you love so much that the things that you come in contact with are not as awesome.
Also, we have the trope of the perfect main character. But in this case, I find that we have always this idea of the loner, the person that has been brought up unconventionally, that is so special and incredible and beautiful. And I feel that in Abby's novel, that has been said a lot and not seen as much. Let me explain. In her case, because Adam falls for her very quickly, he tells her, oh, you're so special. And that takes away a lot from those things that we see at the beginning. We don't see her doing anything incredible afterwards. She's just this beautiful girl that came out of nowhere, and we are told that, we can believe that, but it's not shown as much. In the first part of the book, Orca is really a special character, and when it goes on, she kind of loses the beauty of being brought up unconventionally and therefore having a perspective on the world that is very different.
Once again, here I have to come in Orca's defense because when I registered this video, I thought about the two characters as having a similarity that was deeper than I actually think they have. Because when Rapunzel hasn't left a freaking tower for all of her life, it is obvious that she's gonna find so many more things incredible and exciting. Whereas Orca has not lived on the moon, she has lived in a place where she has come in contact with things that are reality, and you cannot compare the condition that they were brought up in as being as similar, I feel. So Orca, once again, I'm sorry, I think I judged you a bit too harshly.
She becomes immediately from this naive character that is quite funny to a love expert in 1 second, someone that knows how to navigate this new modern world that she has never seen and never come in contact with in an incredibly easy way, which takes away from the character. Rapunzel has an incredible amount of sketches where she is just clumsy and incredibly out of touch. She doesn't wear shoes. She carries around a pan that she smashes people with when she's in trouble. She has a chameleon best friend. She has all of those weird quirks that she just comes along with. And the beauty, I feel that in Rapunzel is not granted. I mean, she's cute, not beautiful. Mother Gothel is much prettier than she is, and she looks very, very young and innocent. And I think that that's another aspect of her character that is really cool. Then we have to compare the parental conflict between the characters. We can start talking about Rapunzel in this case first, because the messaging behind Tangled is that there is this evil Mother Gothel that took her away from her family, and at the end of the story we have a complete severing away, cutting away the ties with this character that ultimately ends up crumbling into dust because she's so old. And that is a very cool thing because it shows that no matter how much a parent can have impacted us, because that parent had impacted her for 18 years of her life, and there have been the bad things, but I'm sure that there have also been good things about living with this person. So that is a difficult thing to do, but it's a necessary thing to do, because if she wants to thrive, she has to cut off the ties with this toxic character, and I feel that that's very well displayed, very well. It lives out a really beautiful messaging, and there's the family reunion in this case is really sweet, but apart from that, the main messaging with the main mother character that we see is very, very important. On the other hand, we have a father figure in Orca's case, and he has a kind of similar toxic mindset and toxic outlook on how he sees love, because he sees love under the light of control, because this is how he lets Orca be there. He can wander around, go away from the island, and it's the same thing that they say, because I will keep you safe. You will be safe in this restricted environment because you know what you're going against. You know this environment, so you will be safer here than if you go around and start exploring the world. And I feel that that's such a toxic message in both cases, because preventing yourself from encountering other things is not going to make you safer. It's going to make it different. It's going to make it more restricted, and it's going to prevent you from coming in contact with so many beautiful things that you could experience, but you can't because you're safer there. In the whole story, we don't have an incredible resolution. In this case, I think that we were supposed to see it as a beautiful thing, but I really didn't. We have this part where Orca is super determined to meet her mother, so she traces her, and she finds that the mother is a completely neglectful parent. She doesn't want anything to do with Orca whatsoever, and therefore she comes out of a situation where she was hoping for love, she was hoping for recognition of some sort, falling into this thing where she has nothing of the sort. She is neglected, rejected, and goes away with a broken heart. So what does she do? She goes back to the other toxic parent she has. So she goes back to the father and forgives him instantly for what he has done to her, without a second thought. This is a very, very questionable thing as a messaging to give out, because for how much maybe it was a good thing that she forgave him, and it was a good thing that they brought back the ties and they were happy together afterwards, it's not an incredibly healthy thing to go about it being like, oh yeah, okay, it's fine, you were just protecting me, that's okay, and never addressing what happened before again. This is what I didn't love about the Orca story, that Rapunzel is a fairy tale. So if we have some mixed messaging and weird stuff,
you shouldn't take it at face value.
Whereas the Orca story is not depicted or promoted as a fairy tale, it's a romance. And I feel that in this case we have a nice intention behind it, but it's not explored as well as it could have, and it leaves very, very mixed messaging, so it should be taken with a grain of salt. Then we have the love interest, and I touched on it before, but I found that in Rapunzel's case, we have fun with Flynn, because he's a goofhead, she's a goofhead, and they laugh a lot. And they have a quite nice and fun relationship at the beginning, because they're both driven by their self-interest. As they go on in the story, they have a deeper interest in one another and really start developing interest in being together as people. Whereas in the case of Orca, we have Adam, and she discovers about Adam reading a diary before she meets him. So we meet the character before we meet him, and we meet him as this very philosophical, deep guy, and this is interesting for them both, so they talk about it together, and that was interesting, but that was driven a bit too far, and Adam's character didn't develop much outside of that. Even though there is stuff that happens, he remains still. His righteousness is something that could have been an appealing character. For me, it isn't as much. What I didn't find in this book of Abby Emmons, as I found in the previous story with Tessa and Weston, they were a couple that was quite interesting to be around, whereas in this case it's very deep and not much else. Another thing about the love interest is that I'm not sure how much Flynn Rider is older than Rapunzel in the story, maybe a bit older, but in this case specifically, Adam is 10 years older. So that might be something that can be incredibly romantic for some, incredibly triggering and predatory for others. Just something to put out there, because Orca was in a very, very vulnerable position throughout the story, and he can be seen as taking advantage of that position of vulnerability despite how mature and responsible he is played out to be. Also, the timeline of The Other World was a bit too fast in my opinion, because the issues were not explored that much, and at the end of the day it was all about the romance that ended up in a very flowery and cool way, but everything else that had been explored had been left there. Jack was also really not cared about that much, and he fell down as this side character that had no real importance in the story. If you're considering to read the book, I would consider, if you like that kind of thing, love triangle between brothers, which for me was really weird and something that I didn't appreciate as much. The final thing that I want to touch upon is the final outcome of the story, because in Rapunzel's case, she cuts ties with Mother Gothel in a very literal sense and goes back to the world with her real parents that are the king and queen, becoming this princess that serves her reign and helps other people thrive. That was one of the possible outcomes of this kind of story, because she was a captain in the tower, discovers the new world, falls in love with it, and wants to stay, and that's what she does. After we have the marriage with Eugene, but that doesn't have a clear-cut timeline, and that leaves it open to interpretation. So that means that it might not have been a 3-day thing. They kind of imply that time has passed. On the other hand, in Orca's case, we have her deciding to ditch everything about what she has discovered about the world and going back to her island with her father. And with her comes Adam. They have known each other for around 2 weeks, 3 at best, and they ask each other to marry one another. And that was another possible interpretation of the whole story, if tending on what is nowadays condemned a lot more. And I don't want to condemn it, because I think that that is a decision that is for the single person to make. I feel that the reasoning behind why Orca did that is a bit questionable for me, but if she did prefer that kind of life, that is a very empowering move in itself, because being someone that is so resourceful that you can do all of those things for yourself, I think that that's really, really cool. This is everything that I can compare between those two stories. So tell me, what is the ending that you would like for yourself? Marry the first guy you ever met, but would you do it in a remote environment or public thing? Tell me in the comments below, and tell me if you thought that the two books or stories were similar, and if yes, if my interpretation of them was satisfactory for you, or if I missed anything. Love you all, guys. Bye!